a lab in Bergen, Norway, 2023. A technician pulls a printout from a stack of 166. Subject 1 phene. The genetic code reads AA at a position called RS129138832. For more than a decade, that code has meant one thing, with 95% confidence: brown eyes. Clipped to the corner of that printout is a photograph. The eyes in that photograph are hazel, green near the edge, gold around the pupil. The code says brown. The photograph says something else entirely. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Subject 114 wasn't an outlier. Out of 166 people carrying that exact brown eye genetic code, 43 of them didn't have brown eyes. That's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 people where the gene that science calls the most reliable eye color marker we have was simply outvoted. Think about that for a second. Not wrong. Outvoted. If you've ever taken one of those consumer DNA tests and it told you with total confidence what color your eyes should be, and your eyes are hazel or green or somewhere in between, this is the story of why that prediction might have been incomplete from the moment it was printed. Because somewhere in a stretch of DNA 500,000 base pairs long, something else was steering the outcome, and it's been doing that for a long time. Longer than anyone expected, in places nobody thought to look. If you actually want to know what's written behind your own eyes, not the simplified version, the real one, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Because the official answer has been incomplete for over a decade, and almost nobody has said that out loud. And the reason that override exists at all traces back to one mutation, one person. A date that, by every model anyone had built, shouldn't have produced what it produced, at least not where it did. Actually, before we go further, do this for me. Don't look in a mirror. Just picture your own eyes right now from memory. Got it? Hold that image. Drop a comment with what color you just pictured. Because by the end of this video, I think you're going to realize there's a lot more competing for that color than you've ever been told. All at once, in 2008, a Danish geneticist named Hans Eiberg, working at the University of Copenhagen, traced that override switch back to its source. And what he found didn't ease the mystery. It deepened it. The mutation that turns off pigment production in the iris, the one responsible for blue eyes, came from a single person, one individual, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. For 10 years, Eiberg had been chasing this exact question. In 2008, his team did something almost nobody had done before. They compared the DNA of blue-eyed people across 3 places that on a map have nothing to do with each other: Denmark, Jordan, Turkey. What they found was the same genetic fingerprint in all 3 populations, tracing back to the same single ancestor, the same switch, flipped once. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. This isn't a story about a trait that slowly developed, region by region, over tens of thousands of years. It's a story about one switch flipped in one person that then traveled through migration, through marriage, through movement, carried by people who had absolutely no idea they were carrying anything at all. Somewhere in the Mesolithic Near East, one child was born with an iris that, for the first time at any meaningful scale in our species, produced almost no melanin. And every blue-eyed person alive today shares that single point of origin. That one infant, that one switch. This isn't just ancient history. This is in your DNA right now. But, and this is where it gets strange, in places that mutation never fully reached, places where, by every model, it should be fading out, almost gone, it isn't fading, it's still spreading. And nobody predicted that. Still spreading. But not where anyone expected. In 2023, a team of forensic researchers in Saudi Arabia ran a study that, on paper, should have produced nothing interesting. They tested 80 volunteers, looking at that same HERX2 region, including that same switch, 129138832, to see if it had any relevance to eye color in an Arabian Peninsula population. a population this gene was never built for, never validated on. What they found was the same genetic markers, Rus1291382, and two others, Rs7170852 and Rs916977, significantly tied to Hazel and intermediate eye color, in a population that, by every assumption baked into the original research, shouldn't have shown this pattern at all. Here's where it gets strange. The European eye gene isn't European. It's just better documented in Europe. The same machinery that produces blue eyes in Scandinavia was found shaping hazel eyes in Saudi Arabia. Not by coincidence. By the same ancient mutation, running through a completely different genetic background and landing on a different result. Picture two people, one in Bergen, one in Riyadh. Both carry variants at those same three positions in HERX2. Neither one has blue eyes. Both have hazel. Their eye color is the result of the exact same ancient switch, expressed through two genetic backgrounds that split apart tens of thousands of years ago and never came back together, until a lab comparison that neither of them will ever know happened. And that's the part that should make you uncomfortable. We talk about European eye genetics and Middle Eastern eye genetics like they're two different systems. They're not. It's the same code. What's different is everything sitting next to it. So if the same gene is doing this in two populations that were never supposed to be compared, what does different even mean here genetically? Because the answer to that question is about to flip something you were taught in school. The same story, but told backwards. You were probably taught this in school. Brown eyes are dominant, blue eyes are recessive. Two brown-eyed parents, brown-eyed kid. Simple, clean, a law of biology. And yet, the data said the exact opposite. That same Norwegian study, the one with the 43 out of 166, went looking for why the dominant brown genotype kept failing to produce brown eyes. And they found something. Scattered across that same 500,000 base pair stretch of DNA, sitting around the HERC2 and OCA2 genes, were dozens of other variants. Variants that, in some people, were strong enough to override the gene that's supposed to call the shots. Dominant was never a description of power. It was a description of how often something showed up in 19th century pea plants, a rule borrowed and then applied to human eyes like it was a law of nature. Picture two brown-eyed parents, both carrying that dominant brown genotype, and their child's eyes come in hazel, shifting toward green in certain light. Under the textbook rule, that shouldn't really happen. Under what the Norwegian data actually shows, it's not an exception. It's that modifier network doing what it's probably always done, just never measured this closely before. So here's the part nobody talks about. That modifier network isn't a footnote. In over 1/4 of one studied population, it was the deciding factor. It overrode the gene the textbooks call definitive. And it doesn't stop at eyes. That same region of DNA also shapes skin tone and hair color, which means this isn't just a hazel eye problem. It's a much bigger blind spot than anyone admitted. For over a decade, the field treated one mutation as the master key to human eye color. What the Norwegian data suggests is that it's less a master key, and more the loudest voice in a room where nobody had finished counting how many voices were actually in it. This discovery was made years ago. Nobody talked about it. Until now. Actually, hold on a second. If you watched our last video on the Avars, and what their DNA left behind in the Carpathian Basin, you already understand something about how this works. A genetic signature can sit inside a population for centuries, quietly shaping outcomes without anyone ever naming it. Drop Avar in the comments if you caught that one, because what you're about to see is that exact same pattern, just shrunk down to fit inside a single human eye. One of those uncounted voices has a name, and it's been sitting in a published paper since 2009, mostly unnoticed. One of those voices has a name, RS1800407, a variant inside the OCA2 gene itself. Identified back in 2009 by a team of researchers in Poland, and tied specifically to green and hazel eye color in European populations. Separate from, and working alongside, that HERS2 switch we've been talking about. Here's what they found. The HERS2 switch behaves like a dial for volume. How much pigment gets made? This one is different. It's a missense mutation, which means it actually changes the protein OCA2 produces. It doesn't just turn the pigment down. It changes how that pigment is structured and spread through the iris. One variant controls the volume. This one controls the texture. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Hazel eyes aren't brown eyes with less pigment. They're not blue eyes with more. They're the visible result of two separate processes happening at the same time. One controlling how much pigment gets made, the other controlling how it's arranged, interacting and producing exactly what you'd recognize as hazel. The gold flecks near the pupil, the ring pattern, the way it shifts in different light. Those gold flecks some hazel-eyed people notice. The ones that seem to get more or less visible depending on the lighting, that's not your imagination playing tricks. That corresponds to real, physical variation in how melanin is laid out inside the iris. And this specific mutation is part of what produces it. This isn't ancient migration anymore. This isn't a population study. This is a specific, named molecular change, possibly producing the exact texture you could see right now by looking in a mirror while you're listening to this. And here's what makes it matter. Because this variant changes structure, not just volume, it can be active in someone whose HERS2 genotype already predicts brown eyes. Which means this might be one of those uncounted voices from the Norwegian study, quietly working underneath a prediction that already failed. A variant identified in 2009, sitting in the literature for over 15 years. Possibly the missing piece behind that brown genotype, hazel eyes, missed in Norway. And as far as anyone can tell, it's never been tested directly against that exact group. The witness has been on record this whole time. Nobody's called it to testify. It was finally called to testify. And the testimony didn't resolve everything. When researchers checked that 2009 variant, RS1T00407, against the people in the Norwegian study, whose eyes didn't match their genes, they found it in some of them. Not all. It explained part of the pattern, not the whole pattern. But what they found next changed everything they thought they knew about this. Combine that variant with the HERS2 switch, and a third marker, RS9BA66977, the same one flagged in that Saudi study, and you get a model that correctly predicts hazel versus brown in most of those previously unexplained cases. Most. For a moment, it looks solved. 3 variants, working together, accounting for what one variant alone couldn't explain. Hazel eyes, it seems, are a polygenic compromise. The ancient switch from Iberg's 2008 study, layered together with these structural modifiers. 3 variants, 1 eye color, solved. And if you have hazel eyes, this would mean those 3 exact positions in your genome could, in principle, be checked. And the combination would explain what you see in the mirror. A clean answer. 3 parts. Done. Except that 3-variant model was built almost entirely from European and Middle Eastern groups. And even within those groups, most still leaves a real number of people unexplained. And here's the detail that matters. No large study of this same gene region has ever been done in South Asian populations, or East Asian, or Sub-Saharan African, or Indigenous American populations. Populations where hazel eyes also show up, sometimes more often than you'd expect. Through genetic backgrounds, this model has never even been checked against, which means the solved model is solved for a narrow slice of humanity. And the populations left out of it aren't a footnote. They're billions of people, many of whom have taken consumer ancestry tests whose eye color predictions are built on exactly this model. the one with the gap nobody's filled in. There's one population where a study like this was reportedly underway. As of right now, the results haven't been published. Not rejected, not contradicted, just not back yet, not back yet. But not impossible to find either. Here's what we do know. While there's no dedicated large-scale hazel eye study for South Asia specifically, broader genetic research across that region has documented these same HERS2 and OCAA2 variants, including the ones tied to lighter eye color, at low, but real frequencies, especially in northern and northwestern populations, where there's a well-documented history of ancient mixing with the Central Asian and West Eurasian groups. If you've ever wondered why hazel or light-colored eyes occasionally show up in families across South Asia, North Africa, Latin America, and beyond, with no obvious explanation, this is the genetic backdrop that question has been sitting on top of, mostly unexamined. That same single ancestor mutation, Iberg, traced back to 2008, the one that produced the first blue eyes somewhere between 6 and 10,000 years ago, didn't stop at Europe's edge. The same West Eurasian ancestry that carries it shows up at lower levels all the way through the Iranian plateau and into South Asia. That's not a new discovery. That's a well-documented part of how populations moved and mixed. What's new is putting it next to everything we just covered. The unexplained populations from the last segment aren't separate from this story. They're downstream of it, carrying the same ancient mutation at lower frequency, sitting alongside structural variants like RS1800407. In combinations nobody's actually studied. Picture a family in Punjab, or Sindh, or a village in rural Iran. A grandparent with unexpectedly light or hazel eyes, and a story that's followed that grandparent their whole life. Some old rumor about an ancestor from somewhere else. Foreign blood, the family calls it. The folklore and the genetics might be describing the exact same event. An event the genetics has simply never been formally asked about. Unstudied doesn't mean doesn't apply. It means invisible to the research, not absent from the biology. An ancient mutation traveled across a continent and a half into millions of living people. And there's no name for that group, not in genetics, not in everyday language. Just millions of people carrying it quietly, generation after generation, in eyes that don't quite match the rest of the family photo album. Open that photo album far enough back, and the missing piece starts to show itself. It's not one gene, and it's not just 3 variants working together either. Here's the actual pattern, and it shows up everywhere we looked. Norway, Saudi Arabia, the broader European data. The people and populations with the most unpredictable eye color are consistently the ones where that ancient HERS2 switch, and the OCA2 structural variants are both present, but neither one is common enough, in that particular genetic background, to fully take over. That's not a description of a finished trait. That's a description of an argument that's still happening. Hazel eyes are what it looks like from the outside, when neither side of something that started 10,000 years ago has actually won. Not in the population. Not even within one person's genome. It's not a settled compromise. It's an ongoing negotiation, happening again, every time a new cell forms in a developing iris. You know that thing some hazel-eyed people notice. Their eyes looking greener in some light, browner in others depending on what they're wearing or the room they're in. People call that a mood ring effect, a trick of the light. The genetic explanation is stranger than that, and more literal. That iris is built from tissue where 2 ancient genetic programs are both still active, neither one fully shut down, producing a structure that behaves exactly as unsettled as it looks. Everything I just told you, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. Hazel eyes are not a color. They're the visible surface of a 10,000-year-old standoff between 2 ancestral populations, one from the Near East, One much older, and if you have them, that standoff never ended. It's still running, unfinished, inside your own iris, right now, somewhere else, in Bergen, in Riyadh, in a village in Punjab, in a kitchen in Mexico City. Someone with hazel eyes is standing in front of a mirror, adjusting for the light, watching their eyes shift slightly the way they always have, the way they have their entire life, and not wondering why. Not even once. If your eyes are hazel or green or any color that's ever seemed to shift, even a little, what you've been looking at every single time was never a finished color. It was the current state of a negotiation between two ancient populations, running inside human eyes for thousands of years, and inside yours for your entire life without ever once being asked to stop. Right now, nobody knows exactly which combination of variants decides for any one person where that negotiation lands, or whether lands is even the right word for something that might just keep going, unmeasured, for as long as that eye exists. Somewhere between a mutation that's 10,000 years old and a study that hasn't been published yet. Your eyes are still deciding what they are.